Who's the Tribune target? The Tom Stromey? So does any of these reporters know?
No, I'm going to announce it.
Really?
I'm gonna announce
Amy
it.
doesn't know.
Amy knows because I told her to apply.
Oh.
Okay. All right, everyone. Welcome to the March Director's Cut for January production statistics. Hope you guys are starting to experience spring. It looks like it's sunny out there today. So just a reminder, keep everything to the topic of the Director's Cut. Use the chat feature below to ask your questions. We will have Lynn go first for 30 minutes, and then we will be followed by Justin. And then there is an announcement after all of these folks have gone. So please make sure you stay on for the announcements. And with that, I will share our screen, Lynn, and you can take it away.
All right. So welcome to our March webinar. We'll be talking about January and December production, kind of looking at the dead of winter. I'm kind of going with a icebound theme for this month. You can see from the production numbers, not a lot of change. We really expected a much bigger production drop than we saw. So down about 7,000 barrels a day is all that's just slightly over 0.5%. So really pretty steady. Pretty well locked into what December looked like. All of that was the legacy conventional vertical well situation. 70 of those kind of wells went off production. 7,000 barrels a day drop in production from the legacy vertical wells. And the Basin production actually went up about 400 barrels a day. So almost no change at all when you're looking at something like 1.2 million barrels a day and 400 barrel a day change. So it really was all in the older legacy production. When we were looking at data coming in a month or so ago, we talked about the power outage, and we were anticipating that that was going to impact a fairly large amount of production. But as it turns out, the dominant effect there was on legacy wells, some of the older high water producing production that's very dependent on electric power. So pretty interesting that's how it turned out. Natural gas production, pretty much the same story, just almost back-to-back production numbers, about 0.8% drop in natural gas production. A little bit of relief there then in terms of stress on the infrastructure. Like I said already, total well count stayed flat, really no change, but 70 of the legacy vertical wells went offline and stayed offline. In the permitting area, really steady there as well. You know, we saw that normal December drop when people celebrate the holidays and don't submit permits. It was up to compensate for that in January, back down in the normal range, about 100 permits. Talked to the permitting staff a couple days ago. They are very busy. So there are lots of permits coming in. That indicates that industry really is planning a rig count build as we move into the spring and summer months. Oil prices pretty steady. We talked last month about the fact that the market not too crazy about shale production increases. I think we saw that translate into some discipline on the part of the U.S. drillers and producers. Actually saw the oil rig count drop week to week for the first time in many months. Natural gas rig count went up, which is a little unusual, but when we get to the storage numbers, I think you'll see why they're trying to refill storage. But overall, U.S. Oil rig count actually dropped week to week going into this week. And so they're working on, maintaining or increasing oil prices. Saw our rig count climb from December to January, climb 1 from January to February, and it's up a couple more to today. So we're at 59 rigs, and again, that's a 74% reduction from the peak. But keep in mind that the rigs are twice as efficient as they were even 4 years ago, and they're probably 3 times as efficient as they were at peak times. We saw a big drop in completions, highly variable. The actual final number coming in for December was 106 completions, and then the January cold set in, and that dropped in half. So that's going to have future impacts as we move out into February and March production, probably a little bit. It was cold in January. 7 days were below 10 below, and 7 days were too windy, so it was cold and windy. And we saw the inactive well count. I've kind of already touched on that, but it was way up. It went up 85. The non-completed well count actually dropped a little bit. And when we look at Fort Berthold Reservation, 2 drilling rigs left the reservation. They moved out into the rest of North Dakota. So actually kind of the reverse of what we saw in the rest of the state. We saw a 1 or 2 rig increase statewide, but a 2 rig drop on Fort Berthold. We saw production drop 7,000 barrels a day statewide. It dropped 12,000 barrels a day on the reservation. Wells waiting on completion went down statewide, went up 25 on the reservation. So just almost a mirror image. What's going on there? It really is natural gas infrastructure constraints. Companies are trying very hard to achieve the flaring targets. And so, with that rig count increase that we saw the last couple of months, they had to back off. So they moved rigs off the reservation. They left wells uncompleted, and we may see that continue to build until we get some summer weather and we start to build out some of that infrastructure. I think the good news is in having discussions, we've had 2 conference calls now with MHA leadership and with the BIA right-of-way folks. And so they're becoming increasingly aware of the need for right-of-way proposals. They have encouraged industry to submit all of the right-of-way proposals that they have. And they will try to go and get the staffing to get those things approved. Industry tells us that they've got approval for all the 2018 work that they're planning to do this summer. So their concern is about making sure that the process is up and running so that this summer and fall, they can get all the right-of-ways that they need approved for 2019. It's going to be a big push for infrastructure build-out in 2019. So some interesting things going on there. When we turn to the flaring numbers, you can see that we lost a couple percentage points on the gas capture. We saw flaring increase about 34 million cubic feet a day was the flaring increase, yeah, and 2% increase. Again, very interesting. The drops were all outside of Fort Berthold, and actually gas capture increased 1% on Fort Berthold. So you can see the impact of what industry did, moving the rigs out, leaving wells uncompleted, reducing or restricting, self-restricting production actually increased gas capture on Fort Berthold, and it went down in the rest of the state where production was up, and of course we had the winter power outage. Want to remind you, there is no such thing as a brief power outage in North Dakota in the winter. Okay, if the power goes out for a few hours, it's going to stay out for a few days. I mean, that's just the way it works. And so that's, I think, really what we're seeing in terms of those 70 or 80 legacy wells going offline and staying offline, and the production drop. But really pleased to see that the production drop was nowhere near what we expected. I mean, we seriously, looking at the data going into January, thought it might be 5 or 10 times what it was. And so it's very encouraging to see what really happened. just one thing to talk about in terms of the federal nexus between state and federal. We're calling it the Rocky Mountain Showdown on BLM venting and flaring rules. We've got a California district court that, because of litigation brought by New Mexico and California, wants to see the venting and flaring rules, the 2016 venting and flaring rule, in effect, and wants it in effect now. And we've got a Wyoming district court, so the east side of the Rockies, the eastern front, is saying, no way, park the venting and flaring rule and fix it or rescind it. So we've got this really interesting litigation showdown that's going on in federal district court across the Rocky Mountains, with the western front saying, get that rule in effect and get it in effect now, and the eastern front saying, no way, stay the rule, stop the rule, and rescind the rules. And so we'll see how that plays out. It's always messy in the judicial arena, but we keep tracking it, and so we'll keep writing about it for you, because North Dakota is involved pretty intensely in that with Texas and Montana and Wyoming. So that's all the direct comments I had. Very interesting month, and like I said, we're kind of going with icebound. It's spring now. It looks like spring out there, and so that's going to change pretty quickly in the next couple of months with the rig count and the frac crews. I think I'm heading off to Denver next week. I'm going to be visiting with the CEOs of the operating companies in Denver, so I'll have more to report on what their thoughts are about 2018 when we get together again next month. Okay. I know the Petroleum Council Gas Capture Task Force is working really hard, and so one of these days in the not too distant future, I expect I'll be meeting with them, and I'll be able to share some of what their thoughts are on how gas capture may improve in North Dakota. But I know that the industry folks have gotten together, and they're really burning the midnight oil to try to improve gas capture. Okay. Questions?
Did you remember your crystal ball?
Did I remember my crystal ball?
You're going to be asked to look into it. What month do you expect output to break our record, the 1.2 million barrels a day record? And where do you expect output to be 1 year from now?
Wow. Okay.
See?
Well, getting out my foggy little crystal ball, I think May or June we're gonna break the record. So I still think by mid-year we will be producing more oil than we've ever produced in North Dakota. That really kind of all depends on how our spring thaw comes and how long weight restrictions are on the highways. But once those load restrictions, because of the frozen roads in North Dakota that are going to thaw out, once those are lifted, the impetus is there, and industry is really ready to start running. I'm predicting 1.3 million by the end of the year. I think we'll be well above our record production, and you'll probably hold me to that. We'll have to go back and take a look, but we're starting from a better place than I expected. I really expected a much larger production drop in January than what happened. So we're getting a little bit of a head start on it.
Questions from the webinar?
So how many days did you say were affected by either wind or cold temperatures and power outages?
Roughly half the month. So we had 7 days when it was more than 10 below zero, and almost a separate 7 days when it was too windy. And then we had the power outage that came right at the first week of the month. And so when you put all those three factors together, roughly half of the days in January were not suitable for any kind of oil activity. You couldn't really mobilize workover rigs, you couldn't frack wells, and even moving drilling rigs was problematic. So.
Same topic or different?
Different.
Okay, go ahead.
What was the volume of gas flared?
Oh, total volume of gas flared. Whoop, I gotta get to the right page here. We're not as professional as they are in the studio. 310 million. So again, thinking about that, you can understand why we're seeing gas plants announced That's enough to fuel 3 of the sort of off-the-shelf gas plants. Interesting conversation. I might have shared this with you last month, but the gas processors have figured out, at least most of them, that what they need to do is assemble these gas plant modules someplace in Oklahoma or Texas where it's warm, get them fully tested, and then bring them in as modules and connect them in North Dakota. And they actually have traveling crews which are trained for startup operations. So the standard gas plant, the set of modules or train as it's called, is 100 million a day roughly. And so what you're looking at in January with 310 million is enough gas being flared to install 3 of those. So I think you see why, with a little bit better gas prices and profitable natural gas liquid prices that maybe Justin can talk about, the economic incentive is there to build those modules and get them installed late this year and through next year.
Let's go back to permitting. Are there new places that companies are looking to drill, or is there any indication that operators are stepping more outside the traditional core?
And so it would be the second half of that question. One of our purposes at the Williston Basin Conference in May is going to be to highlight some of the other unconventional plays that we think geologically make sense in North Dakota, but haven't been tested. So that would be the new places to drill, but I have not heard of any industry plans to go there this year. What we are seeing is an expansion of rigs outside that really tight core area. So we're seeing, particularly in Williams County, and we're seeing quite a few permits in southern Burke County. So you saw the rig count increase in Mount Trail. That's been a kind of a not in vogue area. So they are moving north, northeast, and northwest. So some of those areas are now economic where they weren't, $5 or $10 a barrel previously. So we're actually seeing rigs move out of that tight core area to the north, northwest, northeast.
Okay, I have another question here. In terms of production, and you said maybe 1.3 by the end of the year. There's some out there that are saying the Bakken's past its prime. Do you agree, disagree with that?
Yeah, I've heard that. I read the article. That is a person who formerly was involved with one of our big Bakken producers. Said the same thing about the Eagle Ford, which I can't really comment on, but I strongly disagree with that opinion. Now, he's a very good manager and a very smart individual, but he hasn't been involved in the Bakken play for several years. And when we look at the numbers, we're still at only 14,000 producing wells, which still puts us in the first period of the football game, or in the third inning if it was a baseball game. So the concern would be that we stayed drilling in that core area for another 5 years. At that point, I think I would have to agree, but that's not what's happening. Oil prices are higher and they're improving, and so we're seeing rigs move out outside that tight core area. I don't think they're going to exhaust that core area anytime soon. And like I said, if this was a football game, we'd be about at the end of the first period.
Any questions from the room?
Or can you clarify on the BLM rule? Is anything in effect for North Dakota right now? Or
Thank you. The question was about the BLM rule. Is anything in effect right now? The answer is no. The Wyoming lifting of the stay came after the California imposition of what am I thinking? I'm not thinking of the word. Preliminary injunction on the rule rescission. So California enjoined the rescinding of the rule, which put it in effect, and a couple days later or the next day, Wyoming lifted their stay on their hold on the rule, which took it back out of effect. So it's not in effect right now.
Okay.
As long as the BLM has just a couple more days to file their briefs in the Wyoming District Court. So we'll see more action before the end of the week.
Is rig count declining at all in the core area, or is oil output declining there at all?
Rig count has dropped in the core area. The new rigs, and I think what you see, for example, is the two rigs that left Fort Berthold. They moved out of the core area out into Mound Trail, Burke, Williams County. So rig count has dropped in the core area a little bit. That's actually encouraging. It helps with gas capture, and it helps extend the life of the core area. Production's pretty flat in the core area. One of the things that Justin and I have been working on is trying to figure out a model where we can estimate how much self-restriction is going on. It's pretty clear in some of the data that there is self-restricting, but we haven't figured out a way to quantify it or who's doing it and where. But it's pretty apparent when you look at individual well production numbers or average new well production numbers, for example, in eastern McKenzie County, that they're producing those wells at 25-30% below IP rate, and they're producing at that steady rate for 6, 9, 10 months instead of having a 10% per month decline like you would have if the wells were put on and allowed to naturally produce as much as they want. So that's one of the things we're trying to work on is can we figure out where self-imposed production restrictions are happening and quantify them.
And the reason why would be because of flaring, that they're self-imposing.
Precisely. The reason why would be the gas capture requirements.
Are we expecting activity and production to really just ramp up as we head into spring and summer? And that's obviously because the price is near 60, right?
Yeah, the question was what kind of a ramp or growth ramp are we anticipating this year? And the answer is not tremendous production growth. I think modest production growth this year and next year. The concern that's out there is that during the 2015, 16, 17 cycle, industry underinvested about $1 trillion worldwide. The end result of that is by 2021, we could have an oil shortage, and we could see a major spike in oil prices. So what the picture looks like is modest growth in 18, 19, 20 with the potential for a big bang in 2021. Unless we see some more growth in 19 and 20, we're headed for really a shortage in terms of supply and demand worldwide in 21, and that would drive pretty rapid growth again. So that's what we've got built into our model. Modest growth, 18, 19, 20, and the potential for some pretty major growth in 21.
So,
and I know we're looking out a long ways, but that's what we have to do.
I know you've mentioned under investment in those years, but what's kind of indicating that we're going to be in this massive shortfall that could cause a massive price spike?
Yeah.
Like, are there levels that we can look at in terms of storage?
So the question was, what are the indicators that 2021 could see a price spike and big growth? There are several. One is that worldwide storage is now back to normal levels. So the tremendous volumes of surface storage that were floating on the water and stored in places like Cushing, Oklahoma are gone. World economic growth is continuing at a pretty good pace. So demand looks like a very nice steady increase, but at the oil prices that we experienced in 15, 16, 17, nobody built a deep water platform. Nobody made a deep water discovery. Some of those really big oil discoveries that come on at tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of barrels a day. Now our hedge against that is the fact that there's still about 3,000 DUCs or uncompleted wells nationwide. And you saw we got almost 900 in North Dakota. So between the 3 major shale plays, there's about 3,000. So we're going to be able to hedge that to some extent in 18, 19, and 20. But that underinvestment in the really big worldwide projects is going to catch up with us at some point, unless there is a major drop in world demand. And there's just nothing to indicate that that's going to happen. All the indications are steady worldwide demand increase and a big shortfall in investment in the big projects.
Aren't some of these storage issues you're talking about created by these cuts that we've seen over the last 18 months by OPEC? And then, that also kind of artificially lifted the price to this level of 60 where we're seeing 65 that we've been over. And then is there any expectation that those cuts are going to go out and cause the price to fall, cause the production to fall? As well as I do.
Sure. So the question was, isn't the drop in storage being driven by the OPEC Russia production cuts? And what does the future of that look like? And the answer is absolutely. The drop in world storage is because OPEC and Russia have tried to manage production and underproduce so that storage would be used up. And that has really happened. They are continuing to work on an exit strategy from the production cuts, believing that by the end of this year, we're going to be in balance, and that if we don't begin to see world production grow, that we'll have a shortfall even earlier. Now, but between those two countries, they have enough production restrictions in place that they can manage that world demand growth for a year or two. But again, you hear the Saudi oil minister, you hear the folks from Russia, which are really the dominant players in this game, saying that there's been a lot of underinvestment, and that they need to manage prices to drive more investment over the next couple of years, or we are headed for a spike in prices. So they hopefully we're going to have good partners in this game, and that with a little bit of discipline on the shale drillers side and some good management on the OPEC coalition side, they'll manage these prices, and they'll raise the prices enough that production will come to the market and prevent that price spike. It's really interesting that they have shifted from the 2016 view that there was way too much overproduction and prices had spiked far too low, to now being concerned about a future upward spike. And so they're trying to manage that, but let's hope they do. All of us, in government, and certainly at OPEC and in the oil industry, would like to find that sweet spot where we're dealing with somewhere around $70 oil, and everybody's playing nice, and we can afford gasoline, and demand can grow and production can grow with it. So that's kind of where the sweet spot is, Bo, is in that $70 range.
Okay, we are out of time. So
I didn't think I could use 30 minutes, but good question.
You used 28, so.
She tried to make me start early.
Yeah. So we'll get Justin switched over here.
All right, thank you.
Okay, whenever you are.
Queued up. Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We'll get started again with the regular set of background information. So again, breaking the production now from the Williston Basin into the 2-year category. So we did wrap up with some information out of eastern Montana and South Dakota. So it looks like about 1.235 million barrels per day from the total U.S. Williston Basin year end of 17. So going into 18, again, we're still lacking some of those neighboring states to get the full picture. But again, I don't expect much change here as we move into the first part of 18 in our neighboring states that share the same transportation network. Month-to-month changes, again, as Lynn alluded to, down both crude oil and natural gas. And so we'll see some shifts coming in the next set of slides on the crude oil transportation dynamics and what was taking place. We did see some fundamental shifts on the marketing of the crude oil, particularly when we look at the market share between pipeline utilization and rail utilization. So a shift for some more barrels moving on to the rail network. We saw an influx of Canadian production coming in North Dakota over the last, I'll touch on it here in a moment, typically have been seeing exports from North Dakota into Canada. When January numbers came out, we actually saw that balance shift to about 20,000 barrels per day of surplus Canadian production coming in North Dakota, which is also impacting these percentages. So you'll see on slide 6 again how this has changed throughout time. One thing I want to point out is that blue dotted line. Each month I talk about the Brent WTI spread. Towards the end of 17, we saw it start creeping back up again. It was north of $5 per barrel, and typically that $5 to $6 per barrel spread between Brent and WTI has been kind of a shifting point for the industry. And we hadn't seen it play out of the numbers necessarily late 17, but I think it started to catch up here a bit in 18, where we saw some barrels again shifting from the pipeline network to the rail network. So again, I think some of that was driven primarily by the market fundamentals at work. So when we look on slide 7 at my estimates for utilization of crude by rail, again, that spike up at the beginning of the year, now somewhere between that 180 to 200,000 barrels per day estimated to be leaving by rail car. Where those barrels are headed, that has stayed fairly consistent month to month. So this is year end of 17. We don't have the January numbers yet for destination information, but again, late 17, there was some more interest, some more barrels heading out towards the East Coast. That had gone down substantially up until the last several months. But again, the bulk of those barrels continuing to move to the Pacific Northwest, the PAD 5 region of the U.S. When we look at oil market pricing, this is what refiners were paying on average for the various PAD districts around the U.S. Again, you'll notice PAD 1 being the highest priced destination, almost $4 higher than the Gulf Coast. What the Gulf Coast refiners are paying, about $1.50 higher than what the West PAD 5 district is paying. We look at the market pricing as we sit this morning. Just over $3.50 difference between Brent WTI. So again, that has come down slightly. So that is below that $5 to $6 threshold. So we will see as we start getting information from March and April if producers and shippers decide to again shift where those barrels are being marketed. LLS pricing 226 above WTI pricing. So again, that LLS is important for us to keep an eye on. Again, the Bakken barrels heading down Dakota Access are entering that LLS type pricing environment. And so we expect those Bakken light sweet barrels to participate in a higher price market than they would if they were going strictly to Cushing, Oklahoma. Slide 11, this is what I was alluding to earlier about some of that shift between the truck traffic between the U.S. and Canada. Again, the exports in black throughout much of 17 were higher. We were seeing more North Dakota oil being exported north into Canada. But again, coming into the beginning of the year, about a 20,000 barrel a day surplus coming back into North Dakota, which again needs to be absorbed then, again, either by our rail network or by our pipeline network. When we look at the gas capture information, again, 1% difference from Lynn because I do not use confidential wells in my analysis, but the percentage breakdowns, where we saw an increase was in that orange piece. Again, gas flaring from wells that are connected to a gas gathering system, but there just simply isn't enough capacity on those lines. And so that will continue to be the biggest challenge, I think, going forward for the industry. When we look at slide 13, again, just that month-to-month change in gas flaring in the state, we did see that bump up from year end of 17 up into January. And again, all of that increase was from wells that do have a pipeline connection. And then one of the last slides here looking at the gas gathering industry's ability to get wells connected. And so what we're looking at here, January, as Lynn alluded to, completions were way down. But the good news was that gas connections stayed relatively high. They kept pace with some of the trends they've been on. So they were able to make some headway and get some substantially more connections done than new wells that were completed. So that is good news. And then slide 15, this was a slide that Allison had requested. I know there was a lot of questions last month about processing plant capacity in the region. And so what you're looking at here, there's a lot of things going on, but the background in peach colored, that is our existing natural gas plant processing capacity. The hunter green color coming forward year end of 18 and into 19, those are the additional processing plants that have been proposed for North Dakota. And where you see the red and the dark gray line diverge from each other, those are my two forecast scenarios of natural gas production for the region. I think fundamentally the assumptions behind what I call my case 1 and case 2, I think we're trending much more closely to the case 1 type scenario, which would in 2018 put North Dakota in a situation where gas production exceeds our gas plant processing capabilities. And so I think this was the point that we were trying to drive home with some of the gas capture challenges are really going to start coming to a head here as we move into the summer months and until we see some additional processing plant capacity come online here late this year and into 19. So and again, you can see some of the gas capture requirements from the Industrial Commission on this graphic as well.
What's the volume that we need to add in 2018 or expect to add in 2018?
As far as the pure plant capacity, off the top of my head, I hate to go on the record and say a number. I can get that. I do on my website. I just updated my table of gas plant capacity. All the various projects was updated again this morning, so that is current on my website.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Keep going, but there was a question for Lynn, and I said that's for Justin, and that was a good spot.
I don't have a good answer for him off the top of my head, but yes, that was my last slide, so I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, so we will get you that answer.
Do you, as we kind of like get towards pipeline capacity, do we expect to see some of that head back over to rail and have rail transport ramp up?
Oh, yep. And so you're talking crude oil now.
Yeah.
Yep. So the question was about crude oil pipeline capacity for the region. And so when we look at, so North Dakota saw a large increase in our ability to move crude oil by pipeline last summer when Dakota Access went online. However, that additional capacity in my estimates is expected to be exceeded again by production within the next 12 to 18 months. At that point, unless a system was expanded, those additional barrels, any production above and beyond our pipeline capacity is going to be forced onto the rail network. And so, again, the industry will move from a situation where they're electively choosing rail transportation in today's environment to a situation where they're forced to use crude by rail because there simply isn't enough pipeline capacity until an expansion occurs.
Do you expect the situation with the Canadian surplus, do you expect that to continue, or do you have any more information on that?
I don't. So the question was about those Canadian barrels being trucked north and south. That information on that is incredibly difficult to obtain. All I'm able to obtain is just the raw numbers coming through. So I don't know what type of marketing strategies, what type of duration that we should expect on those. So,
do you have an estimate how much production will exceed pipeline capacity in the next 12 to 18 months?
For crude oil?
Yes.
I do. I don't have it available here in these slides, but on my website, again, on my presentations page, I do have a graphic in my latest PowerPoint on there that does break down my forecasted oil production as well as the pipeline capacity. Okay. So I can get that to whoever's requesting it or anyone else that's interested.
Okay, I'm making a note. Okay. Any other questions? Once? Going twice? Okay, so that will do it for our March webinar. I did mention that I had an announcement here. So if you guys have any questions, I wrote down the follow-up that we needed to do. I'm going to be out of the office here beginning at 11:30 now, and won't be back hopefully until next Monday. And then from there on out, my last day at Oil and Gas will be March 29th. I've accepted a new position here in Bismarck at a public relations company here. So the DMR is already started advertising my position, and so we're accepting applications until March 19th. They're working to hopefully get someone in as soon as possible. Until then, my email will stay active, and it'll be checked regularly by a member of staff here. And once they have someone in place, my email for a time being will be forwarded to that person. So when you start getting a response from somebody after March 29th, it's because they've got someone in place. So we're working on a procedure to make sure the webinar runs without a hitch next month. So look to that for that. But I just wanted to thank everybody for working with me all these years. I know at times I can be a little difficult, but that's my job, and I've enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed working with all of you, and I'm sure I'll see some of you with my clients that I'm having at my new company that I'm working for. So thanks to everyone, and be nice to the new person, okay? And to Lynn when I'm gone, and Justin, thanks. Okay, so then we want to end the meeting because